He was the emperor who challenged every religion, changed the laws of his empire, and created a faith of his own. From royal debates to forbidden rituals, Akbar's rule became one of the most controversial chapters in Mughal history. The first years of Akbar's rule, much of the empire was controlled quietly behind palace walls. Because he was still very young, trusted guardians and senior advisors handled many royal matters for him. At first, powerful generals loyal to his father protected the throne, and later the influence of his foster family became stronger inside the Mughal court. According to stories recorded by court historians, Akbar was born in the harsh desert lands of Rajasthan during a difficult period for his family. Soon after his birth, he was first cared for by his young mother. But following royal Timurid traditions, the infant prince was later placed under the care of several wet nurses chosen from respected noble families. These women were not ordinary caretakers. In the royal world, becoming the foster mother of a future emperor brought honor, influence, and political importance. Historical accounts suggest that Akbar was cared for by many foster mothers during his childhood, far more than what was normally seen in royal households at the time. Their families later became closely tied to the Mughal court, and their sons were often treated almost like royal brothers. As Akbar grew older, authorities slowly gathered around the household of one powerful foster mother, Mahal. Her son, Adam Khan, rose rapidly in status and influence. Over time, success and power filled him with pride. Court writers later described him as a man consumed by ambition and blinded by arrogance. He began keeping valuable treasures for himself instead of delivering them to the imperial treasury. His behavior inside conquered cities caused concern among many nobles, and whispers of corruption spread through the palace corridors. Senior officials feared that personal ambition was beginning to challenge the authority of the young emperor himself. Then, during a hot afternoon in Agra in the year 1562, tension inside the imperial palace reached a dangerous level. Armed guards entered the royal court beside Adam Khan while rival ministers watched carefully. What had once been hidden political rivalry was now turning into an open struggle for power inside Akbar's empire. The violence inside the Mughal palace began suddenly and without warning. A senior court official, connected to one of Akbar's royal foster families, stepped forward to greet Adam Khan inside the palace court. But before anyone understood what was happening, Adam signaled one of his armed followers, and the official was attacked and killed in front of the nobles and servants standing nearby. Fear spread instantly through the royal halls. With sword already drawn in his hand, Adam Khan moved quickly toward the private royal chambers where 19-year-old Akbar had been sleeping. His footsteps echoed through the palace corridors as terrified servants rushed out of the way. But before Adam could force his way inside, a loyal palace eunuch reacted immediately. He slammed the heavy wooden doors shut and locked them from the inside, blocking Adam's path only moments before he reached the emperor. The noise and shouting awakened Akbar at once. Instead of hiding, the young emperor emerged from another passage connected to the royal chambers. Furious at the murder inside his palace and the betrayal unfolding before him, Akbar rushed directly toward Adam Khan himself. Court historians later wrote that Akbar struck Adam with such force that it looked as though he had been hit with a heavy weapon rather than a bare fist. The blow knocked the powerful nobleman unconscious onto the palace floor. Akbar's anger did not end there. He ordered the palace guards to drag Adam Khan's unconscious body to the top of the palace walls, more than 30 feet above the ground. The guards threw him down from the height onto the stone surface below. But the fall did not kill him. Still breathing and badly injured, Adam Khan lay broken beneath the palace walls. Akbar then commanded his guards to bring him back up again by pulling him upward through the palace structure. This time, the emperor gave a final order. Adam Khan was thrown headfirst from the walls once more. The second fall crushed his neck and skull, ending his life permanently. According to royal chroniclers, this brutal punishment became an example of imperial justice against betrayal, arrogance, and abuse of power. After this incident, Akbar was no longer viewed as a ruler controlled by advisors, generals, or foster families hiding behind palace curtains. The young emperor had stepped forward openly and violently to seize personal control of his empire. But Akbar's ambitions stretched far beyond palace politics. He believed a ruler could survive only through conquest, military strength, and constant readiness for war. In his view, if an empire stopped expanding, enemies would eventually rise against it from every direction. For that reason, Akbar kept his armies active and disciplined at all times. Soldiers trained continuously so they would never grow weak, careless, or comfortable during times of peace. Unlike many kings who commanded battles from protected positions far behind the front lines, Akbar often rode with his troops personally into dangerous territory. Dressed in shining armor and carrying weapons into battle, he led military campaigns from the front. Historical accounts praised him as a bold and highly skilled commander who mastered surprise warfare and rapid attacks. During one campaign, Akbar's mounted forces reportedly traveled nearly 500 miles in only 9 days, moving so quickly that enemy armies had almost no time to prepare defenses before being attacked. Akbar also pushed for military innovation and battlefield engineering. His commanders designed floating bridge systems and pontoons capable of transporting heavy war elephants and large artillery cannons across rivers much faster than before. Massive siege weapons were developed under his rule, including giant mortars that required thousands of oxen simply to move from one battlefield to another. Some weapons were even modified to fire multiple matchlock guns almost simultaneously, increasing the destructive power of Mughal forces during large battles. As Akbar's personal rule expanded, he turned his attention toward the Rajput kingdoms of Rajasthan. The Rajputs were among the fiercest warrior clans in India. Their rulers claimed descent from legendary bloodlines connected to the sun, moon, and sacred fire. Across the region, they were respected for extraordinary courage, loyalty, clan honor, and battlefield discipline. Rajput warriors followed strict codes of pride and sacrifice. To them, retreat in battle was considered shameful, while dying with honor was celebrated for generations. For Akbar, defeating these powerful kingdoms would become one of the greatest military and political challenges of his early reign. The Rajputs were considered among the bravest warrior clans in India. Their kingdoms were built on pride, loyalty, sacrifice, and ancient traditions of warfare. For generations they had defended their lands against invading armies, and stories of their courage spread through songs, legends, and battlefield history across the subcontinent. Many Rajput rulers claimed sacred royal ancestry connected to the sun, moon, and holy fire. Across Rajasthan and nearby regions, they ruled powerful forts built high above rocky hills and dangerous terrain. Their warriors followed strict codes of honor where surrender was viewed as shameful and dying in battle was treated as eternal glory. Yet despite their reputation, Rajput kingdoms often fought among themselves. Rival clans competed constantly for territory, influence, and royal power. Akbar understood these divisions carefully and used alliances, diplomacy, and political strategy to weaken Rajput unity before launching major campaigns against them. Among all Rajput strongholds, none carried greater symbolic importance than the fortress of Chittor. The gigantic fort stood on a massive rocky plateau rising sharply above the plains of Rajasthan. Its stone walls stretched across the hilltop while defensive towers watched every movement below. To the Rajputs, Chittor represented independence, resistance, and warrior honor itself. In late 1567, Akbar surrounded the fortress with one of the largest military operations of his reign. The Mughal army established huge camps around Chittor while engineers began constructing special protected roads and attack passages leading toward the fort walls. These covered pathways, known as sabats, were built wide enough for several mounted horsemen to move side by side. The passages were carefully constructed using stone, rubble, timber, and thick protective coverings made from wood and animal hides. Their purpose was to shield Mughal soldiers from arrows, musket fire, and heavy attacks coming from the Rajput defenders positioned high above on the fortress walls. Day after day, Mughal workers slowly pushed these protected corridors closer toward Chittor. From the ramparts, Rajput musketeers and archers continuously fired down upon the advancing construction teams. Many workers and soldiers died while trying to build the passages, but the Mughal advance never stopped. Slowly and relentlessly, the covered roads crawled upward across the rocky terrain like giant stone tunnels reaching toward the fortress itself. The siege dragged on for months. Massive Mughal cannons repeatedly blasted the fortifications while smoke, dust, and fire covered the battlefield. Explosions echoed across the hills as soldiers from both armies fought through exhaustion, hunger, and constant violence. Inside Chittor, conditions became increasingly hopeless. As defeat drew closer, Rajput leaders prepared for one final battle. Warriors dressed themselves in saffron-colored robes, accepting death before surrender. Families gathered together knowing they might never see another sunrise. Then flames suddenly rose from different parts of the fortress. Historical accounts describe these fires as part of Jauhar, the ritual mass self-sacrifice performed to prevent Rajput women from being captured after the fall of the fort. Thick smoke rose into the sky while the atmosphere inside Chittor turned tragic and desperate. Soon afterward, the fortress gates opened. Rajput warriors charged directly toward the Mughal army in a final suicidal attack. Armed with swords, shields, and spears, they fought with extreme courage despite being heavily outnumbered. The battle became one of the most brutal and emotional confrontations of Akbar's rule. When Chittor finally fell, Akbar responded with severe punishment. Unlike many previous victories where he later showed compromise or forgiveness, this time large numbers of surviving defenders and civilians inside the fort were killed after the conquest. Some historians believe Akbar wanted to make Chittor an example that would terrify future rebellions across India. Others believe he saw the fortress as the ultimate symbol of Rajput resistance and wanted its fall remembered permanently. By 1570, most major Rajput rulers had accepted Mughal authority, although some continued resisting from remote mountain regions and hidden strongholds of Rajasthan. With Rajput power weakened, Akbar turned his attention toward Gujarat, one of the richest trading regions in India, connected to international sea routes stretching toward Arabia, Africa, and the wider Islamic world. After defeating many of his strongest rivals, Akbar began ruling with far greater confidence and personal authority. By this stage of his reign, he no longer depended heavily on guardians, foster families, or senior advisors to make decisions for him. The emperor increasingly trusted his own judgment, and many of his campaigns reflected his personal ambitions as much as political necessity. When Akbar turned toward Gujarat, he presented the invasion as a justified action. Mughal officials argued that Gujarat had once briefly fallen under the influence of his father Humayun's empire. Akbar also claimed that some factions inside Gujarat had invited him to intervene and restore order during internal political struggles. But many historians later suggested that these explanations were only partial justifications for expansion. In reality, Akbar clearly understood the enormous wealth and strategic importance of Gujarat. The region controlled valuable trade routes connected to Arabia, Africa, and the wider Indian Ocean world. Rich ports, commercial cities, and international trade made Gujarat one of the most prosperous regions in India. Akbar often described his military actions as efforts to bring justice, stability, and protection to people suffering under weak rulers or political conflict. Imperial court writers later repeated these claims and portrayed the emperor as a ruler acting for the good of his subjects rather than for personal gain. Yet behind these official explanations stood Akbar's growing desire to expand Mughal authority wherever possible. He carefully used internal rivalries among local rulers to weaken resistance before invading. Divided elites inside Gujarat made conquest easier, and Akbar moved quickly before opposing factions could unite against him. The campaign itself was short but intense. During one major encounter, Akbar personally led a small cavalry force against a much larger enemy group. Historical accounts describe him charging directly into battle with only a few hundred loyal horsemen against forces many times larger than his own. The attack succeeded and further strengthened his image as a fearless emperor willing to risk his life alongside ordinary soldiers. By the end of 1573, Gujarat had officially become part of the Mughal Empire. After this victory, Akbar continued expanding aggressively across the subcontinent. His armies strengthened Mughal authority in Bengal and pushed against Afghan-controlled territories. Campaigns also focused on important frontier regions such as Kandahar, a strategically valuable city positioned between Central Asia and India. Control over Kandahar was considered essential because it connected trade routes, military roads, and political influence across multiple regions. Akbar's empire expanded further into Sindh and Baluchistan, while Mughal military expeditions moved southward into the Deccan. Despite his reputation for diplomacy in some situations, Akbar could also act with overwhelming force when resistance threatened imperial control. As his empire grew larger, so did his confidence in using military power to shape the future of the subcontinent according to his own vision. Among all the territories he conquered later in life, Kashmir became one of Akbar's personal favorites. Captured in 1586 after a relatively quick campaign, Kashmir impressed the emperor with its natural beauty and peaceful environment. Surrounded by mountains and crossed by the river Jhelum, the valley contained forests of cedar, pine, juniper, and flowering hillsides that changed color dramatically during autumn. Historical accounts describe Akbar enjoying the brilliant saffron fields and colorful landscapes so much that he returned to Kashmir several times during the final years of his reign. By the end of his life, Akbar had built one of the largest empires in Indian history. His territories stretched toward the Himalayas and Hindu Kush mountains in the north, deserts near Persia in the west, jungle frontiers in the east, and deep into the Deccan in the south. Even so, he never fully returned to conquer the deeper Central Asian lands connected to his ancestors. However, records suggest that he considered building diplomatic relations with China, recognizing the importance of trade routes and political connections linking Asia's major civilizations. Even while fighting difficult wars against Rajput kingdoms, Akbar understood that military victories alone would never be enough to secure lasting control over India. Large parts of the population followed Hindu traditions, and many powerful Rajput rulers still controlled forts, armies, trade routes, and regional politics across the subcontinent. Akbar believed that political alliances could sometimes achieve more than warfare. According to the court historian Abul Fazl, the emperor deliberately created matrimonial alliances with royal families from different regions in order to strengthen peace and loyalty within the empire. Abul Fazl wrote, "His Majesty forms matrimonial alliances with princesses of Hindustan and of other countries and secures by these ties of harmony the peace of the world." One of the earliest and most important alliances came in 1562, when Akbar married a Rajput princess from the royal family of Amber, linked to present-day Jaipur. The marriage became politically significant because it improved Mughal relations with several Rajput rulers who had once viewed the empire as a dangerous enemy. But Akbar's marriages did not stop there. Over time, the emperor married many additional women from royal and noble families connected to different parts of India and neighboring regions. Historical accounts describe him as having hundreds of wives and consorts by the end of his reign, many tied to diplomacy, political agreements, or imperial alliances rather than ordinary domestic life. This created serious debates among religious scholars at court. Traditional Islamic law generally allowed a Muslim man to have up to 4 wives at the same time. Because Akbar's royal household expanded far beyond that limit, questions arose about how these marriages could be considered legal under religious law. According to discussions recorded by later historians, some scholars referred to interpretations connected to muta marriage, sometimes described as a secondary or temporary marriage arrangement discussed in early Islamic legal traditions. Certain advisors argued that interpretations of a Quranic verse could be used to justify imperial marriage arrangements beyond the normal 4-wife limit. Not all Sunni scholars accepted this reasoning. Some clerics strongly opposed these interpretations and challenged the legality of Akbar's expanding royal household. Long debates reportedly took place inside the Mughal court regarding religion, marriage law, and imperial authority. Akbar, however, increasingly refused to let religious opposition control his political decisions. When a leading Sunni legal advisor continued resisting imperial positions even after extended arguments, Akbar replaced him with a more cooperative Shia scholar who supported the emperor's interpretation and authority regarding royal marriage practices. This incident revealed how much personal control Akbar had begun exercising over both political and religious matters inside the empire. At the same time, Akbar followed strict rules concerning Mughal princesses. Although he arranged many marriages for himself, he did not allow his daughters to marry outside the Mughal dynasty. Over time, this became an accepted Mughal custom, likely designed to stop rival royal families from gaining influence or claiming legitimacy through marriage connections with the imperial bloodline. Meanwhile, Rajputs were becoming deeply integrated into Mughal power itself. Senior Rajput rulers and warriors entered imperial service in large numbers. Many became trusted generals, cavalry commanders, provincial governors, and elite palace guards. Their courage and loyalty earned enormous respect inside the Mughal military system. Some historians later compared the Rajputs inside Mughal service to the role played by the Scots in later British imperial armies, proud warrior communities who became some of the empire's most reliable military forces. Rajput nobles were also granted special ceremonial honors inside imperial courts. Historical accounts state that certain Rajput officers were allowed to beat drums while entering the royal citadel, an honor symbolizing status, prestige, and military importance. They were also granted the right to mount guard at royal palaces, placing them physically close to the emperor and the center of imperial authority. Through warfare, diplomacy, marriage alliances, and political integration, Akbar gradually transformed many former Rajput enemies into powerful supporters of Mughal rule. Wider world during Akbar's era. While Akbar was expanding the Mughal Empire across India, major changes were also unfolding in other parts of the world. In China, the Ming dynasty eventually lost power, and the Manchus established the Qing dynasty in 1644, reshaping Chinese imperial history. Meanwhile, in Russia, fur traders and explorers pushed eastward across Siberia and reached the Pacific Ocean in 1637, only 24 years after the Romanov dynasty had come to power. These movements helped expand Russian influence across northern Asia during the same broader historical era. As Akbar's empire expanded across India, he increasingly introduced policies designed to reduce religious conflict and strengthen imperial control over the many different communities living under Mughal rule. One of his major decisions involved Hindu temples and sacred sites. Historical accounts describe Akbar forbidding the desecration and destruction of Hindu temples within his dominions. This policy was viewed as an important change during a period when conquered populations often feared religious persecution after military campaigns. In 1563, Akbar discovered that imperial officials were collecting a special pilgrimage tax from Hindus traveling to the sacred city of Mathura, located about 40 miles from Agra and widely believed by Hindus to be the birthplace of Krishna. After learning about this taxation system, Akbar immediately ordered that such pilgrimage taxes be abolished throughout his empire. The decision removed a burden that had affected large numbers of Hindu pilgrims visiting holy sites. The following year, in 1564, Akbar introduced an even more controversial reform. He abolished the jizya tax, a traditional tax historically imposed on non-Muslims living under Islamic rule. Many Islamic scholars and Orthodox clerics strongly opposed this decision because they considered the tax an essential part of Sharia and Islamic governance. Akbar also attempted to eliminate humiliating and discriminatory practices directed against Hindus by local officials. Historical descriptions mention that some Muslim magistrates had enforced cruel customs against Hindus who failed to pay taxes on time, including the degrading practice of spitting into their mouths as punishment or humiliation. Akbar ordered such behavior to be stopped inside imperial administration. Alongside religious reforms, Akbar focused heavily on rebuilding the structure of the Mughal state itself. With the support of ministers and advisors, he launched a wide series of administrative and land reforms designed to strengthen central control over his rapidly growing empire. Building upon systems earlier associated with Sher Shah, Akbar transformed a loosely connected military aristocracy into a highly organized imperial bureaucracy. Under this structure, powerful nobles increasingly became servants of the state rather than semi-independent rulers. Most land inside the empire was treated as imperial property controlled by the Mughal crown. Akbar divided these territories into administrative regions called jagars, which were temporarily assigned to nobles and officers. Taxes from these jagars were collected by imperial officials, while the nobles responsible for them were required to maintain fixed numbers of soldiers and cavalry for imperial service. Akbar also introduced a strict ranking system that organized nobles and commanders according to the number of troops under their authority. Some officials commanded only 10 men, while the highest-ranking nobles controlled forces numbering in the thousands. The administrative structure became so detailed and disciplined that even the head of the royal kitchens officially held the military-style rank of a commander of 600. Akbar further strengthened imperial authority through strict inheritance policies. When nobles died, their lands and wealth could legally return to the crown instead of automatically remaining with their families. This system allowed Akbar to remove nobles from their jagirs, transfer them across distant parts of the empire, or weaken officials who became politically dangerous or overly independent. Historical footnote: historical notes connected to Akbar's administrative system explain that his use of numerical organization relied heavily on groups of tens and decimal structures based around the number 0. Writers also pointed out that what later became known across Europe as Arabic numerals were originally Indian numerals. These mathematical symbols, including the concept of zero, an Indian invention, spread westward through the Middle East before eventually reaching Europe. As Akbar continued strengthening the Mughal Empire, he became increasingly focused on controlling the power of nobles and preventing regional leaders from turning into independent rivals. By keeping authority concentrated in the hands of the emperor, Akbar hoped to secure greater loyalty from powerful officials while stopping them from building separate political bases that could challenge the throne after their deaths. Even with these strict measures, resistance against Mughal authority never fully disappeared. Historical chronicles state that Akbar faced around 144 rebellions during his reign. Despite the large number of uprisings, the records describe them as unsuccessful, showing how firmly imperial power had become established under his rule. Akbar also reorganized the central administration of the empire. Instead of allowing all responsibilities to remain under a single authority, he divided the major functions of government among several high-ranking ministers. Different officials were assigned responsibility for areas such as imperial finance, military affairs, justice, religious administration, and management of the royal household. This administrative structure helped the empire function more efficiently as Mughal territories expanded across enormous regions of India. The emperor also understood the importance of communication in maintaining control over such a vast empire. Historical writers later noted that, just as the British would eventually use the English language and railway systems to strengthen their rule in India centuries later, Akbar used administrative language and communication networks to unify the Mughal state during his own era. Persian became the official language of imperial administration under Akbar's system. Government records, court documents, political correspondence, and administrative orders were increasingly conducted in Persian across the empire. This policy helped create a more centralized bureaucracy and allowed officials from different regions to operate under a common administrative structure connected directly to the Mughal court. The image associated with this period also shows the famous court historian Abul Fazl presenting a manuscript of his work before Akbar inside the royal court, symbolizing the close relationship between imperial authority, scholarship, and historical record-keeping during the Mughal era. Akbar strengthened his empire by improving communication, administration, and long-distance travel across North India. Persian was made the official language of the royal court, and massive trunk roads were expanded with rows of shade-giving trees planted along the routes for travelers and imperial messengers. Along these improved highways, special roadside stations were built at regular intervals. Travelers could stop there to rest, while imperial couriers could quickly change horses or transfer official messages. Because of this organized relay system, royal instructions could travel nearly 150 miles within 24 hours, allowing the emperor to control distant territories more effectively. To remind people of imperial authority and to discourage rebellion and robbery, some roadside stations displayed terrifying warnings. Severed heads of captured robbers and rebels were placed publicly along the roads. One English traveler later described how these heads were cemented into small towers or turrets shaped like a pigeon house, usually no more than 3 or 4 yards high. These displays were meant both to frighten criminals and to reassure merchants and travelers that the roads were under imperial protection. Akbar also introduced major economic reforms to strengthen trade and reduce corruption. He replaced older forms of coinage with a newly designed square-shaped silver rupee and created a more standardized system of weights and measures. These reforms were intended to increase public trust in business, taxation, and government-controlled trade throughout the empire. Religion remained deeply connected to both Akbar's rule and his personal life. From an early age he appeared drawn toward spiritual experiences and mystical reflection. In his late teenage years, he reportedly rode alone into the desert one day, released his horse, meditated intensely, and later claimed he had heard a divine voice. Years afterward, while preparing beneath a fruit tree during a hunting expedition in Punjab, Akbar again experienced what he described as an overwhelming spiritual feeling. He believed a divine presence had entered his body and mind. The event affected him so strongly that his mother, Hamida, hurried a great distance from Agra to care for him personally. Akbar's spirituality gradually became connected with his political vision. Instead of allowing religion to divide his empire, he attempted to turn it into a unifying force among different communities and faiths. His growing interest in comparative religion led him to establish the Ibadat Khana, or house of worship, where scholars and religious thinkers from multiple traditions could gather for discussion and debate. Additional historical notes. The language later known as Urdu developed from the mixture of Persian spoken by Mughal rulers and local Hindi dialects. It first became common in Mughal military camps, and the word Urdu originally meant camp. Some later historians and commentators suggested that Akbar's intense spiritual trances may possibly have been connected to medical conditions resembling epileptic episodes. Akbar transformed the Ibadat Khana, or house of worship, into a center where scholars from many religions could gather to explain and debate their beliefs. Muslim theologians, Hindu sages, Jain thinkers, and representatives of other faiths were invited to speak openly before the emperor about religion, philosophy, and spiritual truth. As these debates became more intense, disagreements among certain Islamic scholars turned bitter. Clerics began insulting one another as fools and heretics, creating constant disputes over the interpretation of religious law. Frustrated by the endless arguments, Akbar decided to strengthen his own authority over religious matters. He issued a decree declaring that whenever Islamic experts disagreed about the meaning of the Quran, the emperor himself would make the final decision. The order further stated that any decree issued by Akbar could not be challenged unless it clearly went against the Quran itself. This dramatically reduced the political and religious influence of conservative mullahs within the empire. The situation closely resembled what England's King Henry VIII had done in 1534, when he declared himself the supreme temporal head of religious authority in his kingdom. In a similar way, Akbar used royal power to weaken the control of clerics and place ultimate authority in his own hands. Akbar also introduced a new imperial form of greeting known as Saida, in which people bowed low with their foreheads touching the ground before the emperor. Orthodox Muslim scholars considered this practice deeply offensive and even anti-religious because they believed such prostration should only be performed before God. For many clerics, the ritual was viewed almost as an act of religious violation. Other reforms introduced by Akbar created further anger among conservative religious groups. One controversial rule involved personal cleanliness. Akbar supported the idea that bathing before sexual intercourse was preferable to bathing afterward, a change that many traditional clerics strongly disliked because it challenged accepted customs of the time. He also prohibited the slaughter of animals on Sundays because the day was associated with the sun and held symbolic importance. Akbar discouraged long beards, the eating of garlic and onions, and certain outward practices commonly favored by stricter religious circles. Another controversial decision involved circumcision. Akbar argued that boys should not automatically undergo circumcision during early childhood. Instead, he believed they should wait until around the age of 12 so they could personally decide whether they wished to proceed with the operation. The religious discussions inside the Abadat Khana also increased Akbar's interest in Hindu traditions. Hindu scholars explained that their faith had developed across thousands of years within the Indian subcontinent and was followed by the majority of Akbar's subjects. They described Hinduism not as a religion centered on a single founder, prophet, or holy book, but as a system built around dharma, the right way of living. Akbar learned that Hindu traditions included enormous diversity, with different gods, regional customs, and festivals practiced throughout India. The emperor was introduced to the major deities Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, while also learning about the philosophical ideas of reincarnation and karma, the belief that the actions performed in one life influence a person's future existence. These debates and exchanges deeply influenced Akbar's thinking. His growing curiosity about different religions became part of his larger political goal of creating unity within a vast and diverse empire. Akbar became deeply interested in understanding the beliefs and social structure of the Hindu population living across his empire. He learned that a person's social and religious identity was largely determined by the caste into which they were born. He was also told that cows were considered sacred and that killing them was forbidden in many Hindu traditions. These ideas left a strong impression on him. Wanting to understand the culture more closely, Akbar ordered major Hindu epics and sacred texts to be translated into Persian so they could be studied within the Mughal court. He attended Hindu festivals personally and was sometimes seen wearing a red Hindu tilak on his forehead during public ceremonies. Within the imperial harem, Akbar allowed his Hindu queens and other non-Muslim wives complete freedom to practice their own faiths and customs. They were permitted to worship openly according to their traditions. This openness angered several Orthodox Muslim scholars. One disgusted critic complained that Akbar had been persuaded to venerate fire, water, stones and trees and all natural objects, even down to cows and their dung. To many conservatives, these actions looked like a dangerous departure from strict Islamic traditions. Despite his interest in Hindu customs, there was one practice that Akbar strongly opposed: sati. In this ritual, widows burned themselves alive on the funeral pyres of their dead husbands. Society often treated such deaths as acts of honor, and many widows accepted this fate rather than living a life of isolation, humiliation, and the inability to remarry. An English traveler described how families and crowds accompanied these women to the pyre. Once the flames were lit, people shouted loudly so the screams of the burning widow could not be heard. Akbar tried to ban the practice, but in many distant regions of the empire it continued despite imperial orders. Akbar's curiosity was not limited to Hindu traditions alone. He also became fascinated by the beliefs of the Zoroastrians, followers of one of the world's oldest Persian religions. Their faith centered on Ahura Mazda, the supreme spirit of goodness, who was believed to be locked in an eternal struggle against evil. Fire was treated as a sacred symbol of purity and divine light. Centuries earlier, Muslim invasions had forced many Zoroastrians to flee Persia and settle in India, where they became known as Parsis. They carefully protected the purity of their faith, rarely accepted converts, and generally forbade marriage outside their community. Akbar admired their reverence for fire and the sun, and according to some accounts, he himself occasionally bowed toward the sun in a similar manner. A small but intriguing belief from that period claimed that the wise men, or magi, who were said to have visited Christ at his birth may actually have been Zoroastrian priests, known in ancient traditions as Maghal. Copyright-free documentary-style script for U.S. audience. As Akbar continued expanding his understanding of faith and philosophy, he began holding long discussions with Jain scholars. Through these conversations, he grew deeply interested in the idea of vegetarianism and spiritual self-control. The Jain religion, one of the oldest native traditions of the Indian subcontinent, taught that the human soul could only be freed by overcoming attachment to worldly desires. Their followers lived under strict moral discipline, avoiding luxury and practicing self-restraint in everyday life. One of the most important Jain beliefs was ahimsa, the principle of causing no harm to any living creature. This philosophy left a strong impression on Akbar. The idea that spiritual purity could come through compassion and non-violence fascinated him greatly. Akbar also explored the teachings of Buddhism. He learned that Buddhism had originated in India many centuries earlier after a prince from northern India, in the region now known as Nepal, achieved enlightenment and became the Buddha. Buddhist teachings explained life through the law of karma, where every good or bad action carried consequences. According to this belief, human beings moved through repeated cycles of rebirth, receiving either reward or punishment based on their deeds. Akbar became especially interested in the Buddhist idea that true freedom could only be achieved by escaping worldly desire. Buddhists believed that only by following the correct spiritual path could a person break free from the endless cycle of karma and rebirth, eventually reaching nirvana, a state where earthly desires disappeared and the soul merged into ultimate peace. From followers of Confucius, Akbar encountered Chinese moral philosophy. He studied teachings that criticized arrogance, stubbornness, unfair judgment, and selfish behavior. Confucian scholars emphasized discipline, respect for family, moral duty, and harmony between people. Sikh teachers also found Akbar to be an attentive listener. Sikhism was still a relatively new faith during that period, founded by Guru Nanak in the Punjab region of northern India. Akbar learned that the word, Sikh, came from a Punjabi term meaning, to learn. Guru Nanak had preached that God existed beyond narrow religious divisions and was neither limited to Hinduism nor Islam alone. The message that impressed Akbar most was the belief that all people could live together as one human brotherhood without barriers of caste, rank, or religious identity. Jewish travelers visiting Akbar's court introduced him to the traditions and beliefs of Judaism. Some historical accounts claimed that Jewish communities had lived in India since ancient times, although one of the earliest pieces of physical evidence was a copper inscription dated to 388 AD. By the medieval period, Jewish traders had already established settlements along India's western coast. Akbar became curious about Judaism because it was one of the great monotheistic religions connected historically with Islam and Christianity through the traditions of the Old Testament. A note from the historical record also mentions an ancient synagogue in Cochin, in southern India, famous for its beautiful tiled design. Although the Jewish community there later became very small, the synagogue itself survived as evidence of centuries of cultural presence in India. As Akbar continued exploring religions from across the world, his attention eventually turned toward Christianity. In the year 1579, he invited Jesuit priests from the Portuguese colony of Goa, located on the southwestern coast of India, to visit his imperial court. Akbar had first encountered Europeans several years earlier during his conquest of Gujarat in 1572. At that time, Portuguese traders were already active along India's western coastline. The rulers of Gujarat had hoped the Portuguese would help resist Akbar's expanding army, but after witnessing the strength of Mughal forces, the Portuguese chose not to interfere in the conflict. The Portuguese stronghold of Goa had already been established in 1510, only a short time after Vasco da Gama successfully opened the sea route around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa to India. This happened years before Babur declared himself ruler of Hindustan, meaning the Portuguese presence in India had actually begun before the Mughal Empire itself. By that period, Portugal was the only European power with permanent territorial control inside India. Their official possessions included Goa and several ports along the western coast. Beyond these territories, Portuguese merchants had also created trading settlements on the eastern coast and within the Ganges Delta region. Behind the merchants came Catholic Jesuit priests, whose goal was not only trade but also the spread of Christianity. Much like missionaries working in the Americas during the same era, the Jesuits in India hoped to gain religious converts. Akbar treated the visiting Jesuit priests with remarkable courtesy and respect. According to their own reports, he accepted 4 volumes of the Bible with deep reverence. He kissed each volume individually and placed them upon his head, a gesture that symbolized honor and respect in the culture of his court. The emperor even removed his turban before entering the priest's chapel, showing unusual humility for a ruler of his stature. At times, Akbar reportedly wore a crucifix and kept one hanging above his bed. For more than 2 years, the Jesuit priests believed Akbar might eventually embrace Christianity in the same way the Roman Emperor Constantine had once adopted the faith centuries earlier. Yet despite their hopes, Akbar never converted. To Akbar, Christianity was not the single absolute truth but one spiritual tradition among many different faiths found across the world. He believed each religion contained certain elements of wisdom and truth. Rather than fully accepting one religion over all others, Akbar attempted to create a new spiritual system that could unite people without forcing them to abandon their original beliefs. This new faith became known as Din-i Ilahi, meaning the divine faith. Din-i Ilahi combined ideas from multiple religious traditions. Concepts such as reincarnation and karma were accepted within it, while forgiveness, tolerance, kindness toward all living beings, and moral discipline were strongly encouraged. The belief system also described 10 virtues and 10 sins as guides for moral living. Akbar viewed the sun as a visible symbol of divine power and believed that the ultimate spiritual goal was unity between the human soul and God. Akbar gradually developed the belief that kings possessed a special spiritual role within human society. He believed that divine wisdom revealed itself through the intuition and judgment of rulers, and because of this idea, he began seeing himself as a unique connection between heavenly authority and ordinary people. Even so, Akbar never openly declared himself to be a god. His statements remained deliberately unclear, leaving many people uncertain about how far he intended these ideas to go. One symbolic change that reflected this growing spiritual image was his decision to alter the inscriptions on imperial coins. Earlier Mughal coins had carried only his personal name, but Akbar ordered new coins to bear the phrase, Allah Akbar. In the Muslim world, the phrase traditionally meant, God is great. However, because the words also contained Akbar's own name, some people believed the inscription could carry a second meaning, Akbar is God. This ambiguity increased both fascination and controversy around his rule. Supporters viewed him as a ruler chosen by divine wisdom, while critics worried that he was allowing political authority to move too close to religious power. Many of Akbar's important nobles eventually accepted his spiritual movement known as Din-i Ilahi, or the divine faith. Yet despite the loyalty of these influential followers, the faith never became a large popular religion among ordinary people. Akbar also chose not to spread Din-i Ilahi aggressively or force conversions upon his subjects. It was not organized like a missionary religion, and because of this limited reach, it never gained a broad following across the empire. After Akbar's death, Din-i Ilahi gradually disappeared and faded from public life. The movement survived mainly as a historical symbol of his attempt to create unity among people of different beliefs. Even though the religion itself did not last, the religious debates and discussions encouraged during Akbar's reign had a lasting impact on the empire. His policies of tolerance and open dialogue created a stronger sense of inclusion among many of his subjects, regardless of which religion they followed. For many people living under Mughal rule, Akbar's court became a place where different traditions, ideas, and faiths could exist side by side more peacefully than before. But Akbar's greatest transformation was still to come. The empire would soon face decisions that shocked nobles, angered clerics, and changed Mughal history forever. In Part 4, the real storm begins.